What is an abandoned house? Well, there are a lot of things going around on YouTube, it seems, where people are saying, I bought a Kominka, I bought an Akiya, I bought an abandoned house, I bought a machiya, I bought a traditional Japanese house, etc., etc., etc. And so what I thought I would do is make some short videos addressing each of these things, and just to make sure that my understanding of the terms are accurate, I decided to do a little research online. I'm looking at my website right here, and I did some searching, but I also asked the AI, which has become very popular over the past few months. And just to better understand what some of these terms are, today's term is abandoned house. Okay, what is an abandoned house? Now, first I'm going to tell you really quickly what my understanding is. Of course, I'm a native English speaker, so if you say abandoned house, I have a general understanding of what that means, just based on my knowledge of how we use the term in America specifically. An abandoned house is a house that has been left alone and not cared for a very long time, usually at least a few years, but long enough so that the grass has been uncut. It's out of control. The house itself is not being cleaned. There are things that need to be taken care of or cared for that are not being cared for. Nobody goes over there. Nobody cares for it. Now, here's the thing. If somebody goes over there sometimes and collects the mail from the house but doesn't do anything else, that's still an abandoned house because they are not caring for the house. Abandoned house suggests neglect, and that is the core reason. Now, in the U.S., taxes are a little different. You have like property taxes. That includes the value of the house and the land together. Okay. Now, you can buy these things separately. You could own the land and not the house, or the house and not the land. That's possible. But I'm going to assume right now that based on what I'm about to tell you, that the person owns the house and the land. The taxes that they have to continue to pay is on what they own, what they actually own. So if the person owns the house and the land, then they're going to be assessed property taxes on the total value of both of those things. Okay? If the person only owns the land, then they will continue to be taxed on the property tax for that land. Whoever owns the house will be taxed separately for the value of that house, and that's a yearly tax. That's how it works. There is a homestead exemption, but that has nothing to do with an abandoned house. That's if you live in the house and it's your main home. So I'm not going to talk about that. Basically, there's another idea that if the person is not paying the taxes on the house, then that's an abandoned house. Well, that's not required for a house to be abandoned. Think about it. A house that has not been taken care of for many, many years and is just falling apart, and the yard is completely out of control, and nobody goes over there, and it really needs some help, but they continue to pay their taxes because that's a legal requirement, that's still an abandoned house, because the core definition of an abandoned house is one that is in neglect, okay? And that doesn't have anything to do with the taxes. Now, if you want to look at it on like a legal sense, and you start getting into details, like for example, a government might require that a house be not paid, their taxes not be paid for a certain amount of time in order for it to legally be considered an abandoned property, so that they can then somehow seize it and then auction it or whatever. That's different. That's not what I'm talking about. So, just for example, my house right here, this is an Edo period Kominka. This house is, at the very least, it's 150 years old, but it could be several hundred years old. I'm not exactly sure. If I'm very lucky, I'll find a piece of wood in the attic area that can tell me who the builder was and what year it was built. But right now, I don't know. All I know is, based on all of the research that I've been able to do, and since I've been here, it strongly suggests that it is an Edo period house. If you don't know when that is, you can look that up. It's very interesting. I suggest you look it up. It's pretty cool. So basically, this house is very, very old. Now that I've got that out of the way, is my house an abandoned house, or was it? Obviously, it's not abandoned now because I live here, but was it an abandoned house? The short answer is yes. Okay? My house is one of those houses that was not taken care of at all for 27 years. All right? Now, it's possible that nobody lived here for longer than that, but I know that nobody was actively here at all doing anything for 27 years. So 27 years of not being taken care of at all, with one exception. They were paying the property taxes. But those property taxes are for the land. They have nothing to do with the house, because this house is so old, according to the government in Japan, it is worth zero. Yes, you heard me right. Old houses like this are basically considered worthless in Japan. It is the land that holds the value, and it is the land that you have to continue to pay the real estate taxes for every single year, or the property taxes. So the family that owned this house continued to pay the taxes. So whenever I came along and decided that I wanted to buy it, of course, the main thing is I was looking at the house. I want to buy this house. But technically, when I bought it, the house is just something that was on the land. So when I bought the land, this house and the other 4 buildings that were on the land, and everything else that was on the land, the abandoned car, all of the clothes, the katana that I found, the coins that I found, all of the anime, manga, the TV, the furniture, everything, literally everything that was actually on this property I bought became mine. It transferred to my ownership. Even the family photos that were left here, it all became legally mine. So, was this house abandoned? Yes, of course it was. Because at its core, abandoned means a house that is completely left to rot in just completely unhelped, derelict condition, to just fall apart. And as you can see from my videos, it's literally falling apart in several different areas. So far, the core of the house itself is intact. It has 2 major problems that need to be addressed, and I'm doing my best to figure out how to get that done. But there have been collapses on the outside, between the kura, the main storage building, and the house. That has been completely cleared out. It crushed the car that was out there. I've had that car removed. The bathhouse is completely eaten up with termites. It's going to probably have to come down. The roof of my guest house kura, it is completely caved in, and the rain and the snow goes inside, and it has basically destroyed the floor. The frame of the building is still very good, and the stone foundation is good, but the guts of the inside of the house have largely just collapsed and fallen apart. The canopy between the house and the guest house kura has completely rotted and fallen apart. The plank walkway has completely collapsed and it's gone. You can't even see it anymore. The stairway that went up to the second floor completely collapsed and gone. There's no way that you can look at that and say, oh, that's not an abandoned property because they paid the taxes. That makes no sense. So basically, yes, my property was abandoned. And it was, of course, an Akiya. And we'll talk about that term later. Akiya just means an unoccupied house. That's all. It has nothing to do with a house that is abandoned. Okay? These are 2 completely different terms. So don't mix them up, and don't listen to somebody on YouTube that says, I bought this. I bought an unoccupied, or I bought an Akiya. Well, if nobody was living there, then it was an Akiya. But if they say, I bought an abandoned house in Japan, well, was it really abandoned? If somebody wasn't living there, let's say somebody wasn't living there for like 3 to 5 years, but they would go there and cut the grass and go inside the house and sometimes and do a little dusting and sweeping or whatever. And just nothing major, but just general cleaning, cut the grass, collect the mail if there's anything, go home. That is not an abandoned house. So anybody who says that is pulling your leg. They're just trying to get views and clickbait, and it's annoying. I was speaking with another YouTuber recently. I won't name who it is, but he and I were discussing this concept of people deliberately using certain titles and descriptions in order to get more views. And in some instances, it really seems to work. They seem to get several thousand views on a video, and I haven't gotten several thousand videos in such a short time on such videos. And what I realized is that they're using these keywords over and over and over again to get views, and it's misrepresenting the truth of their situation. Because when I actually watch their video, I see that, that particular house, all it really needed was like a good mopping, and you could literally move in. It had a functioning toilet, functioning kitchen, maybe even some appliances that were fairly new. And maybe nobody was living there just for a few years, but the yard was still in decent condition. Like you could see the rocks and the stones in the yard. There was no grass grown up out of control. Overall, it looked like somebody was loosely taking care of it. And guess what? That is not an abandoned house. So I'm going to leave you with this, because I didn't mean for this video to be so long, but I think it's very important for you to understand when people are trying to mislead you, okay? I'm gonna end this video by reading to you what the Chat GPT says. My question was, abandoned house. Some people are saying that a truly abandoned house must be forgotten about in every single way, including the paying of real estate fees or taxes. Others say that the complete neglect of the property and the house or buildings themselves, that is the abandonment, even if the owners continue to pay the required taxes. So, what is the truth? This is what ChatGPT says. The definition of an abandoned house can vary depending on the context and the specific laws and regulations in the region where the house is located, similar to what I said. In general, an abandoned house is a property that is no longer occupied or maintained by its owner and is often left in a state of disrepair. Okay, remember that. No longer occupied or maintained by its owner. It is often left in a state of disrepair. So it's not just an empty house where they're cutting the grass and, doing a little dusting. That's not an abandoned house. It says, in terms of legal definitions, the exact criteria for what constitutes an abandoned house can vary depending on the local laws and regulations in that region where the property is located. Some jurisdictions may have specific requirements that must be met in order for a house to be considered legally abandoned, such as a minimum period of vacancy, or a lack of maintenance, or both, or a failure to pay property taxes or other fees for a certain length of time. That being said, in common usage, the term abandoned house generally refers to a property that is unoccupied and in a state of disrepair. Whether or not the owner is still paying property taxes or other fees may be less relevant to the common understanding of what an abandoned house is. Some people may also use the term more loosely to describe properties that are underutilized or in a state of disrepair, even if they are still technically owned and maintained by the owner. Okay, one more section and then we'll come back to that. Overall, the definition of an abandoned house is somewhat subjective and can depend on a variety of factors. However, in general, an abandoned house is a property that is no longer occupied or maintained by its owner and is often left in a state of disrepair. So, there you go. One quick note for me to mention to you, and then I'll end this video. It mentions that some people may also use the term loosely, more loosely, to describe properties that are underutilized. In other words, underused. It's used, but not used so much. But maybe in a state of disrepair. So even if they are technically owned and maintained somewhat, they are still not in great shape and not used enough, and so they consider it an abandoned property. But remember, this is some people using the term abandoned house loosely. All right? So, overall, generally, and the majority of the time when we say abandoned house, what we're talking about is a house that is no longer occupied or maintained and is often left in a state of disrepair. So when you see someone that says, I bought an abandoned house in Japan, it should meet that criteria. If it doesn't, they're just trying to get clicks. And that's all I have to say about that. Until my live video coming up in about 30 minutes, part 3 of how to buy an Akiya. We're going to look at some costs involved before you buy, while you buy, and after you buy. But until then, I'll see you. Ja ne!